Hey everybody, I am here with Sam, the creator of a couple of really amazing things that I want to get into in a minute. But how you doing, Sam?
Doing great, man. How you doing?
Excellent. Thank you for taking the time to do this. I've been following your work for a while, and then when you moved over to one of my favorite games of all time, then it that was selfishly a huge game
Hey.
changer for me. So that's what I was like, wow, this is amazing. I got to talk to Sam. Hopefully he'll talk to me. So here we are.
Woo. Happy to be here, man. I'm coming to you live from Spain too, so I'm pretty excited about that. I just got here.
Awesome. So you don't sound like you're originally from Spain.
Definitely not. I'm vacationing here now because I'm originally from Louisiana, and then I moved to New Orleans and most recently New York for a year. And now that I'm moving out of New York, a friend told me, "Hey, if you want to come to stay in Spain for a while, since you'll be between places, I won't be paying rent. So now is the perfect time to spend 2 weeks in Spain and just enjoy it before I go back to New Orleans." So
That's
I'm very
amazing.
excited
Where in
about
Spain
that.
are you?
Barcelona.
Nice, nice. I've never
It's
made it
it's
out there. A
beautiful.
couple of my friends are from there, though.
It's beautiful. It's so clean. Everything's clean. Everybody's nice, and everybody, it's just a great place to be.
Yeah. Whereabouts in New York were you?
I was in Brooklyn for all of that. About Bay Ridge, Dyker Heights.
Yeah, yeah. Cousin Scott lives there. Brooklyn Video Games is sort of close to there. Certainly,
What?
walking distance ish, depending on where in Bay Ridge you are. But yeah,
I was
that's
like on 13th Avenue and 85th. It was so nice because it was almost suburban in a way.
yeah, yeah, it's kind of. I think that's why Scott loves living out there, is because it's like you're in the city, but it doesn't quite feel like you're in the city in some parts. So it's
Yeah,
the
you
best of
have
both
you have
worlds.
room to breathe. You're not like constantly like surrounded by people on top of you.
Yeah, which is
It's
weird because
very
I kind of
nice.
enjoyed being in the middle of Manhattan like that. Like I
It
guess I'm just super weird, but the chaos of it was so calming. It was like the same feeling of like joy I got in the middle of a mosh pit for the hundreds of metal shows I've been to. It's like that same
ah
like calm in the middle of the storm type of feeling. So
yeah,
yeah,
it's almost like you're being like surrounded by things, by stuff to do, like, and
yeah.
so I can imagine how that would be nice.
Yeah. It's also what I'm kind of used to. This entire room is stuff that I have to work on at some point. So,
Woo! It's
oh,
always nice to be surrounded by a bunch of stuff going on. So,
hell yeah. So, in your own words, could you describe what it is that you're doing? Because I certainly have a very positive, strong opinion on it, but I think it'd be better to just hear it directly from you at first.
oh yeah, you mean the whole restorations thing? That's basically, it's the term restorations is a bit of a misnomer or a marketing term because I'm not actually. It refers to the practice of restoring paintings, which is a bit different because when you restore a painting, you basically have a painting that's really old and is full of like dirt and grime, and you're scrubbing all of that away basically to create what the painting would like, more what the painting looked like when it was painted. But that kind of terminology doesn't really apply because here there is no dirt and grime. It's not dirt and grime to scrub away. It's actually like quality that was lost. Like things were taken away from this soundtrack when it was put into a game, and now you, instead of taking stuff away, you have to put stuff back. And so the way that we do that is I have to completely recreate the soundtrack from the ground up, but a recreation wouldn't totally describe that because I'm not taking any creative liberties. I'm using exactly what the composers would have used to create this game, and all of the sounds, all of the drum machines, all of the keyboards are exactly the same. And that's basically it.
That's an excellent analogy. And I guess we should step back one step farther just for people who aren't quite aware. So, games on the Super Nintendo were created with samples. So, you have these sample discs of stuff that the developers used, Remute, the musicians, creating his own samples for this stuff. And then it's compressed down to files that could be accessed like this is probably a terrible analogy, but like pre-programming keys on a keyboard with these samples, but digitally, so that you could pick and choose in your programming what you would like to come up. And what you're doing is finding the original samples before they were compressed down very heavily to fit in the Super Nintendo. Before they were kind of smushed together to make it all work, and you're creating basically CD quality soundtracks of the original samples, correct?
Yes, that's a very good analogy to describe how they kind of like created those things. They took the samples from the keyboards, drum machines, whatever's, they sampled them, and then they had to encode them in the game in very, very small file sizes, often shortening the sample, like shortening the sample so that it and giving it a shorter loop point, or and also applying SNES compression and all the bits and like crush down and stuff like that. So what I have to do is finding that I have to first find the sounds that they used, either by asking the composer or by just hunting on the internet for the most popular machines that were used, because there was a lot. It was the 90s, so there was a lot of this people used a lot of the same machines that were popular. And really after that, the hardest part is getting the uh, files from the game, getting the programming to from the game to cooperate with a studio environment today. So studio environments today read the best way to read music is MIDI format, but that was not how the game was written. The game was written in hex format, so you have to do a bunch of computer stuff to convert. You have to basically have to use a program to crudely convert all this hex data into MIDI, and it comes out a mess. So much of a mess that it takes about 3 or 4 hours to sort of like commute. Like in the case of Donkey Kong Country, it took about 3 or 4 hours per track to convert this mess of hexadecimal of MIDI converted hexadecimal data to like in and plug in all of these samples to a way that plays it in a cohesive song.
Yeah.
And
It's the same with original recorded music too. Like if you try to put them through any of those filter software that could take like, hey, just feed us your individual guitar tracks and we'll turn it into MIDI. Nope. I mean, yeah, a MIDI file spits out, and yes, there's ones and zeros and numbers there, but it's never the original, and it's way worse with drums. And not being a drummer, it makes it almost impossible for me to do that. So,
Oh yeah,
I
because
feel
it's
your
looking for a
pain.
note, and it's like
Yeah.
it's a bit of a different thing because instead of converting data, it's converting actual audio, and but
Mm.
yeah, it ends up being a mess, I'm sure.
Well, could you go back to what you started with a little bit about how you hunted down the sample files and the research and contacting composers? Could you talk a little bit about that? Because that in itself is pretty damn fascinating.
Oh yeah, well to start off with the Donkey Kong Country series, I knew that David Wise had proclaimed pretty widely that he used the Korg Wave Station a lot in the Donkey Kong Country series. So I started with that because the Wave Station had a VST version, which meant that I could play the mostly like more or less what the Wave Station sounded like on a virtual machine. And so it started with me going and buying that VST, which was official, and uh, and finding those waves that he used and saying, "Oh, this is that wave," and then exporting it and sort of playing the Donkey Kong Country songs on that. And it started with that, and then I said, "Okay, well, what else did he use? Because I know these are not all the sounds." And Mr. Wise gave me a list of things that he used, and even then was like he didn't like that was not totally a complete list. There were still some things missing, like a lot of different little sources that he had drawn from that were missing, sample CDs and whatnot. So it was very difficult and very time consuming to fill in all those holes. But as I understand it, most most soundtracks did not use that many sources, and with the Super Metroid soundtrack, it was a lot easier because I didn't actually didn't weren't wasn't able to ask the composer because I don't have any contact information for the composer with Super Metroid. But the process for that was basically I found a sheet online, like a Google sheet online that somebody had started documenting the sounds from Super Metroid, and most of those were from just three different machines. Some were from sound effect libraries, but most of those were just three different machines all across the board. Whereas Donkey Kong Country was something like must have been at least 20 different machines or 20 different sources.
Wow, that's pretty nuts. And I see on your YouTube channel you have videos where you walk through in real time the process of doing this stuff. So if anybody's interested in exactly what it takes to do that, just head over to your YouTube channel and see. Is there one video in particular for people that are just curious that you would suggest they start with? We'll of course link to it in the description and everything, just to show your process.
Not particularly. I would say like I just did kind of just decided like, hey, if people want like I was very open with my process from the beginning. Like I put my project files for FL Studio online, so if anyone wanted, they could go and look at what makes these things tick. And I also just said like it's very easy to if I just turn on OBS and start streaming this process, and then that way I can just do it live. And I also felt that it taught me a lot about like sort of presenting these things to people, and sort of so I'm not just in my room doing these things on my own. It actually got me out to be able to present well to people. And yeah, it was a lot of fun, but I don't have any sort of recommendation for people to start with. I would say definitely one of the later ones, because it was rocky to start for all, and it's like a lot of them I don't even have live streams for. So definitely, if you look on my live streams and just pick one of the later ones, they're all pretty much the same as it got to be. With so many tracks, it got to be pretty streamlined.
And once that process was streamlined, it was basically hunt down the original samples through the methods you just said, then take the original off of the cartridge samples, off of the extract the hex data of the music from the ROM, convert that to MIDI, then clean that up to actually make it a file that sounds like the original soundtrack. And then are you just putting these samples into your audio software and just matching them up with the originals that were after they've been converted to MIDI?
Well, the process, so sort of the way it went was the process was I had originally found, like before these things were even a thought, I originally found a program it was an old DOS program called SPC Tool, and basically for the first time it allowed me to be able to see how the soundtrack worked. It showed me all the channels, all the pitch data, all the volume data, and all the sample data. And more importantly, it showed me a list of all the samples used, and I could export those into WAV for use in a studio. And I said, whoa, this is actually cool. So these actually came from somewhere. And I was able to play the compressed instruments in my DAW. That's where I started the search for looking for these things. So I exported all the waves from the ROM into a Dropbox folder, and then I started on the search, and the search was like ongoing. So I would find, and once I found enough waves, like the entire sources for one song, I would go and restore it. So what I would do is I had somebody create me, like convert me the MIDIs, because I didn't even have the program to convert them to begin with. I had to have someone convert them for me. So they gave me all the MIDI converted hex data. So I would have those in MIDI format stored, and I would have the virtual restore like origin sample patches stored in my Dropbox and in whatever format. And I would just, at the start of my session, I would load up the MIDI, cut the loop out and all this stuff and fix it up and process it. And then as I would go through and I would say, okay, this bit of notes belongs, this bit of notes goes here, this bit of notes goes here, copy it to this instrument, copy to that instrument, and be loading the remastered patches in at one at a time until I had every melody line individually, every drum beat, everything like sort of like crunched down to be where there was no repeats. And then I would go, once that was all done, everything was copied down, I would go into the playlist and build the song out of these blocks, out of put each melody where it belonged, each drum beat and everything. And then after that was done, once we had the complete song, I would go and take a break because at that point it was like 2 or 3 hours. I was doing a song, and in Donkey Kong Country 2, especially, these got pretty tediously long. So I would go and take a break, yeah, and then I would come back, and then I would start the mixing and mastering, which means that I would add effects. I would add Real Studio reverb and things like that, and really just make the sound, like go and zero in to all the details to make this track pop and make it really feel like a polished studio track.
So I do have to share my opinion on that. And I never once thought that anything was over processed, or I never thought that you added anything that wasn't there. Like when you say you added these things, my ears interpreted it as you took the original and made it sound it made it sound exactly the way the original composer probably wanted it to sound, but just much clearer. So it's not like you added silly effects or like a womp womp thing or whatever on it. You really did the original's justice on this. And I got to pause for a minute and say that if anybody wants to have a basic idea of what to expect, imagine you only played Super Metroid on some crappy ass RF only CRT like I did growing up, and then suddenly one day you walk into Steve from Retrotech's house and you play it through a calibrated BVM in RGB, and it's just like this is the same but completely different. And that's the exact feeling I got, because what I ended up going through, I said, "Yeah, I want an original experience. Let me plug this into my TV with, I'll use RGB, but I'll use the original Super Metroid cartridge." And that lasted about a half hour before I was like, I know what else is out there. And I put in the MSU1 orchestral soundtrack, which was great. I'm still a fan of that, but to me personally, just my stupid opinion, it is closer to throwing in a CD of the orchestral soundtrack and turning down the volume on your TV than it is the real game, because they never sounded like that. And then I remembered, I was like, wait, wasn't Sam working on this? Did he finish it? I follow you on YouTube, but I mean, I also follow a million people, so I was like, I can't remember. Was it finished? Was it not? And I messaged a few people, and they're like, oh yeah, the MSU1 conversion's already out for that. So I rushed, I got it all done, I moved the save file over, and when I fired yours up, I just was like, holy shit. I mean, this is the original, but in HD, or however you want to describe it. So I wanted to interrupt you there, just because if people hear you say that, a lot of especially musicians are like, "Oh, what creative liberties did you take with the Super Metroid soundtrack?" You nailed it. You did it justice. No one would have no one would have expected that there was other stuff in there. I think you really, whether you intended to or not, you really hit the original so well. I mean, it's an absolute great representation of the original, just better.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was part of it. I definitely didn't want to take any creative liberties, but the fact that these samples were so old, and they did also change. So they did also put some of them put effects on some of these samples before they put them into the game. So to sort of like bring them into a modern sound and make them really pop, I had to do a little bit of like, obviously I had to put reverb on it because there was reverb in the game. It was just not very good reverb. So I put modern reverb on it. There was also a lot of delay, like that was programmed into the soundtrack, because you just program the note twice and then that's delay. So I would put that, but instead of doing that, a lot of the difficulty with um, bringing that crudely converted MIDI into a studio setting was removing a lot of those doubled notes that basically represented delay, and saying, okay, like let me put in an actual delay plugin at the same, like with the same amount of time, the delay, and let me also do some like they had a knob in FL Studio that allowed you to sort of do like some separation that made it like sort of like the note kind of fizzle out when it echoed, so it sounded more like a real echo. And then of course I added my own realistic reverb, and the samples as well. They're kind of like, they're very 80s sounding, so they can sound kind of flat. And one thing that the SNES did was it added some, and this was like David Wise talked about. It added a desirable distortion to the game, so that It made them sound a little beefier. It beefed them up. And so what I kind of did was a lot of times I had to add those back by adding what's called saturation, which is a slight distortion, so that you can't it doesn't sound distorted. It just sounds a little beefier. And I also, in certain places, I added chorus to make it sound a little nicer, a little more varied on some of the mono samples, especially. So, what you get is you want to keep it subtle. I kept it subtle and made it just like it was just a little bit of enhancement, so that it didn't
Hmm.
sound flat.
Yeah, that makes complete and total sense. And it's one of those things that, it, this kind of goes back to I would be willing to bet that the original composer would have loved to have put a delay effect and not just use the same sample twice, slightly offset. So, but you could hear their intent in the original game. So I just, once again, I mean, I really think you nailed it. The stuff that you chose and why you chose to put those plugins in really fit with the game. I mean, I probably played the game 100 times in my life. It's that and A Link to the Past are my favorites. So it just, the whole thing absolutely blew me away. And I also heard, not often, but in one or two of the samples, I heard it in a way that I never knew it was there. Like I thought, like I'm trying to remember the exact one, but basically the original sample on the Super Nintendo was very muffled and gritty, and then hearing the uncompressed version, it did change one or two of them for the better, at least in my opinion. But it's kind of interesting to me to hear the original very compressed sample versus what the original cartridge version versus the original sample that they used, which you used in yours. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Was there any one that really stood out to you? Like, wow, that's the original. It doesn't quite sound the same.
Yeah, there was a lot of times where I was like, oh, there's like, it really brought it, to full thing, and I was like, oh, that's what that sounds like, and it kind of it's the original samples, like the darkness of them and and how like depreciated they were, really left a lot to your imagination.
Hmm.
And now with the restored versions, that imagination being removed, kind of it can have like, while mostly I think good effects it has, sometimes it can have some not so desirable effects, and it can bring to light some things that you didn't even know were there. And a lot of people do not like that. And also, some with inevitably with these restored versions, there's some amount of guesswork and
Hmm.
some amount of I have to level all the volumes myself. So a lot of times, not all of the volume, not everything is going to sound completely level as it was in the game, because I'm doing this by ear. So inevitably, some things are going to sound different, and it's not going to be a one-to-one conversion, one-to-one recreation. And I know in particular with Super Metroid, recently one of the samples I actually had gotten wrong. Like, that was not because it was so compressed. That was not one of the right sample that I used, and I recently corrected that, and I think it's uploaded now. But there was a female choir layered with a orchestra hit, where it was like, oh bo bo bo, and it was this like nice and dark female choir. And I had gotten that kind of wrong. Like, I had, like, okay, I said, maybe it's this orchestra hit layered with this female choir, but no, it was all one sample, and I recently replaced it. So you might find that some things get updated and replaced as I understand them. But that was one thing that would, like, I had just some things I get wrong. Like, I can't hear them very well, and I use the wrong sample. So, but those are constantly being corrected and re-uploaded as new things arise.
That's awesome. What are you using to mix these? A combination of headphones and studio monitors? Do you have a setup that you prefer?
Yeah, well, in mixing, one should always use as many you should always have a dedicated and very and like and a dedicated, like, honest representation of the mix. But you should always use as many different sources to listen to these as you can, because I have like I mainly listen on studio monitors that are on a desk, and they're held up to be level with my ears, and they're also facing my ears in the sense that they're forming an equilateral triangle. So pointing to my ears, but they're not pointing straight back. They're pointing towards my ears at an angle. So if you can draw like a triangle between these and this and to my ears. And so that's kind of what I use. But that inevitably, even if you have furniture in the room, there's a lot of bass builds up in the corners, so that can be a little bit dishonest, and you can feel more bass than there is. So what I do is I also have these mixing headphones, Sony MDXR, or I think that's what it's called, Sony
Half the people
MDR
listening
something.
probably have the same one. I used to have that too. I think my old bassist accidentally snagged it. I get those and the Audio Technica. Forget which ones these were, but I like them both very much. I actually liked yours better for mixing, and I like those better for just listening.
Yeah, they're wildly popular because they're pretty inexpensive. I got these for about $100, and everybody uses them everywhere because they're just they're completely honest. They don't have any of the bells and whistles. They don't boost the bass. It's a flat frequency response all across the board, and that makes it great for mixing. So I'll go and switch from that to the speakers, and then I'll export real quick in MP3 and play it on my phone speakers because I know a lot of people will be listening on their phones, and you have to have particularly you have to make sure that the kicks come through in the speakers with the very little bass. You have to make sure the kicks come through well in phone speakers. So you have to make sure you have enough middle on the kick, so the click of the kick has to pop through in the speakers where you can hear them. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's not going to be very well represented. So I try to get as many different sources, in the car, on a Bluetooth speaker, headphones, speakers, everything. Anything that just gives you a much more well-rounded idea of how these things are going to sound.
So you've definitely mixed other albums before because you just checked off all of the boxes. You're clearly not an amateur. Is this what you do for a living, or it's just a strong hobby of yours?
It's a strong hobby. I actually haven't put out any other albums. I've been doing this kind of thing since I was young, since I was like 14 years or 16 years old, and I've been making my own covers. And this is like, but I just did a lot of research and realized had a lot of practice, and this in particular, doing these restorations gave me a lot of practice, which is why you might find that if you go back to the old YouTube videos, they sound a little bit different because I'm actively updating these and then reevaluating them to make sure that they give the proper representation of sound and getting better at it. So I'm looking close forward to making more covers and putting out some albums now, possibly in the future. But as of right now, this is my first real release.
It's funny because the work that you're doing with the restoration stuff, I know, lack of a better word, how you're going back and constantly tweaking that is a good thing. I mean, at least in my opinion. And you're also bouncing it off of the original cartridge and the original game. So you're always finding ways to make it sound truer to the original while still having all this awesome stuff. But it's funny because when you write your own music, everybody I know like hates their first couple albums and like talks about redoing it, remixing it, whatever else. I do because it wasn't the album I paid for. I was like, hey, we're gonna do it this way, and the producer's like, yeah, I'm out of time. Like, but I paid you, so we all have that. But it's also when it's your own music, it's an exact reflection of where you were at that moment.
Yeah, you
So
have to recognize that it's like, okay, this is what you were like what your knowledge level was in time. So it's not really like something that you put up and keep on improving. It's just a snapshot in time. As opposed to that's different with it's different with the restorations because this is not me. This is someone else's work that I'm trying to represent as accurately as possible. So I'm going to go back and update it as much as possible. It's not like it's just me. So but when I do stuff, like on my own, generally I'll update it like for as originals or covers. Definitely I'll update it a bit, but most of the time I'll leave it alone as it is. And if I really need to, just make a whole updated version and release that again.
mm. What kind of stuff were you working on for your own, your personal music? Was it just more video game covers? Was it stuff that you wrote?
Some stuff that I wrote like I remember I was originally started out using FL Studio, and I made a lot of Donkey Kong covers and a few, it was a bunch of like just little, half-assed like tunes that I had made, and I put them all up on SoundCloud. I think they're still up on my SoundCloud now. My my SoundCloud, that yeah, I still have that up. And Jammin Sam SoundCloud, and it's got a, and then I also did a lot on Little Big Planet, just noodling around, because Little Big Planet 2, what it allowed me to do, it allowed me to create games, and I could also create my own music. So I did a lot of noodling on that, and I created a lot of stuff on that, and it was, really just having fun. Not really put I had didn't really put out anything serious because I didn't have a business mindset very much before I started making these restorations. And actually, when I was making these restorations, I didn't have the sense to put it up on YouTube in the beginning. So somebody else uploaded on YouTube for me, and they didn't exactly credit me. So that became a
Hmm.
problem. But once I started uploading the tracks on YouTube regularly, that sort of like disappeared. And I just, kind of learned the business sense to sort of release these and put out the download links and everything like that.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. It's not what you just described is so unbelievably common. And if you asked me 6 or 7 years ago, like if that's something to worry about, I would have kind of just laughed. But when we put out the last album my band put out, there was a couple of messages that people were sending me screenshots. Like people were like, "That's bullshit. Bob stole that. I wrote that song. He wrote everything." And I'm like,
Ah,
no, my other person in the band wrote that when they were 16, and then I came in and put all the guitars on it. We have all the original files. What the fuck are you talking about? So it's like,
yeah, it's a
I
journey.
have
You have to
no
hit the ground
idea.
running.
Yeah, I had no idea that that was a something that you had to worry about. So yes, uploading it to YouTube, even if you upload it to like a second channel that you don't want to, promote at the moment, at least you have that there. So you could say digitally, like, this is mine, people can't steal and say it's theirs. And
SoundCloud's
send,
great for that, I find.
really?
Yeah, I don't. I put everything on SoundCloud personally because it's like it's not as serious as YouTube. It's not like, oh, everybody's gonna see this. It's like, no, SoundCloud's a little smaller, so I'm like, oh, I'll put it on SoundCloud. I don't have
And
to do
if
video
somebody
that
were
way.
to download it off of SoundCloud and upload it to YouTube, would that catch? Are they affiliated
Oh,
like that?
yeah, that might catch actually. They would have to rip it from SoundCloud if you don't allow downloads, but that might be a thing actually. So that's why if it's something I don't really care about, then I put it on SoundCloud. I'm like, I don't even care if this, if anyone steals this. But if I care if someone would steal it, then I would be like, yeah, I'm gonna put it on YouTube just for that. You know.
Hmm. Yeah. And if it's something that's really important to you, always just sending it to the copywriting it. It doesn't cost that much money, and it's something that's kind of worth it because if some asshole steals your music and puts it up on their YouTube channel and they make $50 in revenue on it, that sucks. That's annoying. But if some asshole takes it, samples the middle part, makes a song, and now all of a sudden it's got a million views on YouTube, that's a lot of money that they just stole from you. So
Oh yeah,
having
that's
that
why when
registered
I
is a
come out with an original tune, a lot of times I will go and copyright it. That way, if I see it online, I can be like, "Hey, DMCA takedown, motherfucker."
exactly. Yeah, that stuff's absolutely mind blowing to me. But I'm glad you're
Yeah.
already on top of that because it sucks. There was one, I forgot which one it was. I don't know if it was Olaf Fink, but there was one kind of famous metal musician that started doing YouTube stuff and was writing stuff live just to be for fun, just to make it like a Twitch stream and have people join in on the process. And then somebody pulled one of the riffs or one of the main sections of the song and then copyrighted it and got it done before the musician did. So that they're like, well, now there's nothing I could do. I can, I'm not going to take him to court and spend all my money to get, one cool part of a song back. So then they never did it again. They never wrote songs live like that.
Yeah, that's a real tragedy because I'm also of that kind of mindset where I would like I think it would be like there's like a severe lack of like people that just go online and jam and like do music live, and it's and I think a lot of the reason is because of that whole thing where people are like waiting to just steal something. And it's really it sucks because it's like I always wanted to do sort of like a Bob Ross type thing where I go on a weekly show and just write music and be like, it's like the joy of music or something like that. I think that would be really cool. But yeah, there's nothing. I definitely say like you have to be prepared for something like that to happen, but it should never stop you because there's it's so much fun to do just going online and creating things. If you can get that sort of that bravery to be able to go and say, hey, I'm just going to go online and create something, and sort of like even if it comes out boring, at least you'll be able to, eventually you'll be able to get that sense up where you can consistently create interesting things and create a good show.
Yeah, agreed. I have such a weird ego about that. Like I haven't played guitar in months. Just life kind of messed with me, and a couple times I played on camera, made a bunch of mistakes, and I don't care at all. It's fine. I already recorded the originals. Like whatever else, this is a cover. Make fun of me all you want. That's cool. I'm doing my best with the limited amount of practice I've had this year. But I would never. My ego would not let me play music that I haven't released yet because I want to be like that's not how it's supposed to sound. It's like every dork who's ever like dug deep into something probably had that same weird feeling. But it's like until it's ready, until it's out and released, like I don't want to share that. And part of it's because the music I do is always, it's metal, so it's guitars, drums, bass, singer, everything goes together. But I know somebody who does very crazy acoustic guitar, where like the guitar is a drum and a guitar, like, and he writes everything like just live on his live streams. And I don't know. One of these days I'll get up the guts to do that. I just have that weird thing where it's like, no, it's not ready yet. Like, but that's a
Yeah, it's
me
like you're
problem.
constantly under, like, like the way art is, we're constantly under pressure to make something amazing. Like we think everything has to be just the greatest thing that we've ever done, and it's just so much pressure. So we feel like we have to like spend hours and hours on this at a time to make this like like really push this out. But what you don't realize is that if you're doing that now, you're gonna have to do that every time if you want to get. But you if you want to get consistent, like your work consistent, but you can just like no, just take it easy and create what you can. It's not going to be as good as if you spent hours tweaking it and just like sitting with the sound. But you'll find that you'll be able to create stuff more efficiently and more regularly. So and that will build your creative muscle to make it where you can like, okay, the bottom line of what I can create goes up. So because I can keep on creating and keep on churning out things, and just
Mm.
enjoy doing it.
Do you ever get like ear fatigue, listener fatigue, whatever you want to call it, where everything just starts to sound the same after a certain period of time?
Oh yeah, everybody gets that. So if you're listening to a mix for like hours on end, you need a break because, and this is something I experienced with a recent track of mine. Like I would tweak it and tweak it and tweak it and then like make revision after revision, and I would still find things wrong with it. And I find that your tweaks can be much more productive if you tweak it. If you okay, like you say, you take a day, you take a day where you spend like 6 hours on it tweaking it and put out a new version, and then you leave it alone for like 3 days at least. Then you come back to it and you'll be much more refreshed. You won't be as biased. Your ears will be basically tuned right again.
Yeah, I find that really happens to me quicker, I think, than a lot of other people, especially when it comes to dialing guitar tones. I stopped. I found an amp that I loved, and been my sound for the past 6 or 7 years. But I just remember sitting there and like trying to get the guitar to sound perfect, and trying different amps and different plugins and everything else. And an hour and a half will go by, and I'm like, all right, this is cool. Let's play the first one back and see how it sounded. And like the first one sounds better. Oh, what the fuck? And then like I'll walk away, I'll come back the next day and I'll be like, wow, it got the more time went by, the shittier it started to sound because I'm starting to hear different things that don't really matter. So and I wouldn't even try to do anything other than a demo mix. It's not I'd have zero talent for that whatsoever. So
Yeah,
it's
it's
one of those
interesting how
things.
that works because you always like you start to, it's almost like you start to like lose your touch with reality the more you listen to it. So it's kind of like it's almost like sort of a schizophrenia kind of thing where you go deep, the deeper and deeper into it you go, you start to lose touch with reality. And so it takes, what you have to do is like you have to say no, let me leave it alone, let me return to my life, let me go eat something, let me go hang out, and then come back to it another day, and then by then you'll be refreshed. And I've experienced that with a lot of my old mixes people will say, like, of the restorations, people will say, what this, like, I actually enjoyed the old one better. And while I do think that the old one, like the new ones, are much better, I think there might have been something that got lost in all the revisions. So I say, okay, well, let me go back and listen to the original and then see what jumps out at me that I can tweak and bring back. And inevitably that always like leads to some kind of revision. I'm like, look, I got it a little bit better, without having to revert back to the original.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good. That's a good way to go about doing it. I also found that I've met a bunch of people that are so good at mixing and they enjoy it and it makes them happy. And I am not one of those people. So I just decided that I'm going to stick to being a dumb guitarist and then I'm going to send my files over to my friends. Usually my buddy Mark will take care of it for me. And then everybody's happier. He really likes doing it. He's very good at it. I suck at it. So why don't we just all do the things that we're good at? And, there's
Yeah,
definitely.
that's how it works. You have to so you have the fortune that if you know people, you can delegate some of the things that you don't want to do. So if you don't like mixing enough to spend hours and hours and days after days practicing mixing, and you can say, "Hey, look, this guy over here loves doing mixing, so I'll let him do that." And then I can stick to guitar stuff, which is
Yeah.
what I like and what I want to be doing more of anyway. That was kind of like, the only reason why I got good at mixing is because I mixed what, like hundreds of these Donkey Kong tracks, and that just really like tuned my ear, and now I'm good at it. So c'est
Yeah.
la vie.
So you did Donkey Kong 1 and 2, right?
And three.
And 3. How did I miss 3? I don't think I ever actually played Donkey Kong 3, so maybe that's why I
Three
kind
is
of.
three is easily missed. It could have been a lot better. It was the game that well, they Rare moved their A team onto Project Dream at that time, so they pulled it off Donkey Kong Country 3, and they put him on to Dream. And actually the what was his name, I think his name is the Geek Gamer, or gaming, something like that, something with geek in it. But he talked about how, actually, let me see if I could pull that actual name. But he talked about how Donkey Kong Country 3 could have been so much better, and it could have been so much more well made. It had great, amazing potential, but it just did they whether they didn't have the time. It was called a Geek Critique. So he did a really good video on Donkey Kong Country 3, and it was really quite a charming game. It just wasn't fleshed out as much as it could have been.
Hmm. Well, I loved the first one. I really, really liked the second one, and the soundtracks were amazing. So thank you for taking care of that. What is next on your list, if you don't mind sharing? Did you have a game that you really wanted to dig into that you liked as much as those?
Well, no, I've gotten a lot of requests for other games, but the thing that I tell people is, um, the problem with other soundtracks is, like, for example, the Yoshi's Island soundtrack. I really love that soundtrack, but I just feel that I don't have that much to offer by restoring it, because there wasn't really much work done on the sound design front. The all the waves are super simple, and is it's there's I just don't feel that much sound would like much of more detail would be brought out by restoring it, and I feel that it's perfectly fine as is. I know that people like that really love these soundtracks would enjoy hearing them in full quality, but I'm not that much of a gaming fan. I mostly just liked Donkey Kong Country, and I also felt that Super Metroid was really well done on the sound design front, and really, like, neat, like the restoration really opened it up a lot. But as far as like doing restorations, I don't much do those. I mostly want to see myself doing original work, to be honest, and that's
Hmm.
more of what I'm moving towards. But with that said, a lot of people also ask me about doing things like Mega Man or Plock, and what I tell those people is that, like, I would really argue that restoration doesn't have much to offer those, because those were purely acoustic. Those were like acoustic soundtracks. Like, someone was trying to recreate, like, when someone like and with like things like Actraiser, someone was trying to recreate an orchestra. So I feel like you would have to have an orchestra sound, like a real orchestra or like some plugins do that to really do it justice. Now, the reason why I felt the Donkey Kong Country series and Super Metroid was because those were really kind of electronic hybrid, orchestra soundtrack. So by having an electronic restoration that really brought them to what they could be, like what they needed to be, because those were like they were not fully acoustic. So that's why I tell people like I don't really feel that this is a good use of my time. However, people are I am open for commission, and people have like I'm in talks with some people on doing commissions for some SNES soundtracks. So those are in the works. We're talking about maybe doing, Secret of Mana and Star Fox, and yes, A Link to the Past. But nothing is set in stone yet, so we'll have to see. I still have to make sure I can find all the sample sources, so that's up to date. And as far as people have asked me about doing things like Donkey Kong Country 3 GBA, and that's a bit difficult because that's a newer game, and the sound libraries are still not easily obtainable for a low price. So that
Mm.
would cost a lot, and I would still need to be commissioned for those because again, that's kind of outside of my style, and I feel that I've learned good enough doing restorations that I can say, okay, well, let me move on to covers now, and I have moved on to covers. I've put out a cover of Aquatic Ambience I called Stoned Ape Theory, and so I'm looking to put out more covers very soon as well.
That's awesome. The main places for people to find you, obviously your YouTube channel, SoundCloud, but do you have a Patreon? Do you have a Ko-fi account or any of that stuff?
Yeah, I do. I have. I don't know what that second one is. I do have a Patreon account. I also you can find a little more about me on my website. Is a good place to that people can hire me and get in touch with me and see all the film work and stuff that I've done. But yeah, as a I have an Instagram, Jammin Sam Miller, no spaces, and I have Patreon, Jammin Sam, and also my website jamminsammiller.com.
Awesome. Yeah, Ko-fi is like Patreon, but you could also just tip one-offs, so people like that as well, and it's free to
Oh,
sign up, so
interesting.
that's always a good one to fire up. It's KO dash FI. It's like supposed to
Oh,
be
Ko-fi,
like
like
buy me a cup of
like sort of like
coffee type of
lo-fi.
thing. Yeah. I don't know. I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it. It's kind of a good name and a stupid name all at the same time. So, but yeah, I just I'm always such massive fans of work like this, and I'm a music fan, so I've that's both of these things in
Hey.
the same place is a cool thing. But I'd love to point more people in your direction. Also, do you know who did the MSU1 remakes of these? Did you work with that team? Was it just the
Yeah,
crew on Zeldix?
that was a guy named. His name is actually No Name, so he calls himself No Name SD, and he offered to he basically like I saw that he was creating he was creating like you because to do these MSU1 patches you have to like convert the FLAC files into like PCM files or something, and I don't know how to do that, so he does all that, and I saw that he had it out, and this guy was like updating them every day. So like every time I would put out a new version, this guy was like within 24 hours he would have already uploaded the PCM file to the MSU1 patch, and I was like, okay, well I'll just work with this guy directly and give him credit where credit is due, and so that's been a good that's I feel that's been a good working relationship.
Yeah, I think most people listening to this are going to know what that is, but just in case, MSU1 audio is as if it's a fake chip that was invented to make it as if you had a CD attachment for the Super Nintendo. So it's exactly like how Genesis games played on the Sega CD, but with CD audio soundtrack, but it didn't actually exist. The community made it. So if you do some work to patch stuff over, you could basically pump any kind of audio into this to make it sound right. So I think that's to make it sound right, to make it sound
How
like
you
it's
want
part
it.
of the game, right? So
And that
that's
was very useful for this. That was actually perfect for this project because now people can play the game in with the sound with the restorations on, and that was like a huge blessing. So I'm grateful for
yeah.
that.
Where did you get the idea to even start doing this?
Well, I had first downloaded SPC tool, and that like I said, that one gave like it really blew my mind because of how you could just look into the soundtrack and like see all the inner workings. Like you could see the volume data, the pitch data, the what sample was being played. You can see they had like a meter for each channel, and you could like mute out, you could isolate certain channels and all these things, and you could actually export the samples from the game, and I could like sort of use them in a DAW in my DAW to play the soundtracks. And of course, they were compressed, but I was like, oh wow, this is amazing. So these samples actually had to come from somewhere. So what I did was I made a whole sound font for Donkey Kong Country, and I had to like it was basically just the waves, and I had to input the volume data and the pitch data and the vibrato and stuff. But I made a sound font, which is a file that basically it takes a collection of samples and it works them into instruments where you can set different samples on different notes, and you can control vibrato and stuff like that. So I made a sound font for the entire Donkey Kong Country collection, which was like every instrument, and people seemed to like that. So the next step was like, okay, where did the like let me find where these sounds came from, and it was just a curiosity that kind of sustained itself for a long time until it created something new.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's very cool. Well,
Thank you.
thank you for doing it. I'll obviously leave links to everything in all of the descriptions. I will be continuing to follow you. It's a little embarrassing. I didn't know that you had a Patreon. Sorry about that. I'll sign up
No,
sooner out of this,
I
but
don't ship it out much.
I always want to support the work of people that I'm just big fans of. So thank you for doing
Yeah,
this.
I appreciate that.
I very selfishly want to see a link to the past next, so I'll throw down cash for that if needed for funding. But whatever you feel like doing is the right answer because it's a lot of effort, and if you feel like you're forced to do it, it's no longer fun anymore. So
Oh yeah, yeah. If anyone can hire me for commission, I'm happy to fill out any commission people want. It's just that, I can't pay the bills with subscribers and views. At least not at this
yes,
point.
yeah, absolutely.
So
Well, thank you very much for your time, and hopefully I'll be following up with you in a bit to talk about whatever other soundtracks you just came up with, and how that process went.
yeah, man, it was great. I very much enjoyed doing this podcast. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, man. You're a great host, and yeah,
Thank you.
hope to talk to you soon in the future, man.
Absolutely. Take care.